In 1975, Truman Capote, the beloved bitchy jester of New York's high society, committed social suicide. He published La Côte Basque, a chapter that was not fiction, but a transcript of every secret, affair, and perversion his aristocratic Swans had ever told him. He didn't just betray them, he autopsied them. In return, he was banished. The glamorous, dangerous world he had ruled died with him, leaving the city's social scene a polite, sterile corpse. By the early 1980s, the party was over. The silence was deafening. But New York abhors a vacuum. A new shameless generation was rising. The new money of Wall Street and real estate, men like Donald Trump and Harvey Weinstein, who didn't fear scandal, they craved it. This loaded gun of a world didn't need a confidant. It needed a ringmaster. And then she arrived, Tina Brown, a 30-year-old British journalist who looked at the graveyard and saw a business opportunity. She would resurrect Capote's world, but with one crucial difference. As she famously said, Capote made society dangerous. I made it profitable. The story of that armor, the one forged from printer's ink, Oxford intellect, and sheer audacious nerve, does not begin in New York. It begins in the world that made it necessary. To understand Tina, you must first understand the world she was reacting against and the one she was born into. And the easiest way to understand her is to, for a moment, think of her great silent rival, Anna Wintour. Anna Wintour's story begins in silence and gray. She was born in 1949 into the London of post-war rationing, a city of bomb scars and keep calm and carry on. Her home was a cold intellectual salon run by her famously austere father, Chilly Charlie Wintour, the legendary editor of the Evening Standard. It was a world of serious news, of politics, of whispered judgments. Anna learned at her father's dinner table that power was silence. She learned to observe, to judge, and to rule by remote control. She learned to control the world. Tina Brown's story begins with a party. She was born Christina Hambley Brown in 1953 in Surrey. This was not the London of rationing. This was the London on the verge of swinging. And her home was not a silent salon. It was, by her own admission, a media canteen. Her father, George Hambley Brown, was a film producer, a bit of a bounder, a man who lived and breathed the business of glamour. Her mother, Bettina, was a force of nature, a brilliant and beautiful publicist who had at one point been the press agent for Sir Laurence Olivier. The Wintour home was a place of intellectual austerity. The Brown home was a rolling 24/7 cocktail party, a media canteen for the actors, writers, directors, agents, and journalists who were building the new, vibrant British creative scene. While Anna Wintour was learning the power of silence from Chilly Charlie, Tina Brown was learning the power of the story from her charismatic, fast-talking parents. She was not the quiet observer in the corner. She was, from her earliest memories, the performer. She was the little girl with the dark, tangled hair who was expected at her parents' legendary Sunday lunches to be on, to be witty, to be charming, to perform, to have an opinion. She learned, at an age when other children were learning to read, a fundamental lesson that would define her entire life. The most valuable currency in the world is not money, not class, it is buzz. Or, as she would famously coin it, the fuzz. The fuzz in Tina's lexicon is that electric, intoxicating, almost physical crackle of energy that surrounds a person, a place, a party, or a story. It's the heat, the talk, the fame. It is the sound of people whispering your name. She learned that to be interesting was a form of power. To be boring was a cardinal sin. But this is the key to her entire psychology. Tina was not just a performer. She was a deeply, profoundly insecure one. This was not the cold, controlled certainty of Anna Wintour, who knew her place in the intellectual elite. Tina, by her own admission, was difficult, dramatic, and constantly, frantically performing to earn her place at the table. She was possessed by a gnawing, lifelong insecurity. She felt she was never quite smart enough, never quite pretty enough, never quite enough. She was, in her words, a frantic show-off, driven by a terror of being a wallflower. This combination of dazzling, performative wit and deep, clawing insecurity is the perfect cocktail for a great journalist. It creates a desperate, almost pathological need to be in the party, but it pairs it with the skeptical, outsider's eye of someone who knows deep down they don't really belong. She was, in essence, a punk in a cashmere twin set, and the British establishment had no idea what to do with her. This wild, irreverent, and chaotic energy was too much. She was, to the horror of her upper-middle-class parents, expelled from 3 different boarding schools. 3. This hat trick of rebellion was not just teenage angst, it was a sign. It was the clash of a modern, fast-twitch mind with a fusty, post-war, sensible shoes British establishment. She was quite simply too smart, too irreverent, and too bored to be contained. Her parents, in a last-ditch effort to tame this wild energy, aimed her at the one institution designed to sand down the rough edges of the British elite and forge them into serious people: university. But Tina, being Tina, she didn't just go to university. She went to Oxford. This is the second crucial piece of the Tina Brown puzzle. Oxford, for Tina, was what the sunglasses were for Anna Wintour. It was the ultimate impenetrable suit of armor. It was the serious validation she had always craved. It was the one thing that proved the show-off party girl was, in fact, a first-class intellect. She arrived at St. Anne's College in the early 1970s, and she was once again a glorious contradiction. She was the media child who could quote Shakespeare. She was the rebel who could write a flawless essay on the metaphysical poets. She was not just a student, she was a star. She acted. She wrote plays. And, most importantly, she began to publish. While still an undergraduate, a time when her peers were figuring out how to do their laundry, Tina Brown was already a professional journalist. She was publishing freelance articles in the New Statesman, and most significantly, the legendary satirical magazine, Punch. She had, at 20, already cracked the inner sanctum of Fleet Street, the Chilly Charlie world. She had found her stage, she had found her weapon, and she had, in a preview of what was to come, already learned how to use her sharp, serious wit to puncture the egos of the powerful. She graduated from Oxford in 1974 with a first-class degree in English literature. Think about this arsenal. She was 21 years old. She had the serious credentials of Oxford. She had the frivolous glamour of her film world childhood. She had a little black book filled with the sons and daughters of the British establishment. And she had a bottomless, neurotic, insecure drive. She was a high-low paradox. She was a serious intellectual who loved frivolous gossip. She was a punk who had mastered the establishment. She was, in short, perfectly, terrifyingly equipped to do one thing: conquer the world of magazines. But first, she met her match. This is the central relationship of her life, the one that would ground her, and in many ways enable her entire blitzkrieg. At one of her parents' famous parties, the 21-year-old Oxford graduate, the it girl of young journalism, was introduced to Harold Evans. Harry Evans was not just a journalist, he was the journalist. He was 46 years old, he was married, and he was the editor of the Sunday Times. He was in every sense a god. He was the chilly Charlie of her world, but a chilly Charlie with warmth. He was the ultimate symbol of serious, hard-hitting, investigative journalism. This was the man who had taken on the British government and won. This was the man who had waged a decade-long crusade for the victims of the thalidomide drug scandal. He was a man of unimpeachable integrity, gravitas, and power. And he, the 46-year-old god, was completely and totally captivated by the 21-year-old it girl. Their affair was the scandal of Fleet Street. It was the talk of London. It was messy. It was dramatic. And it was, for Tina, her first real-life high-stakes education in the power and the price of a public scandal. She was, for the first time, being the story. She was the other woman, the ambitious show-off who had stolen the most respected man in London. She learned in that fire how to weather an attack. She learned how to use the buzz even when it was negative. And she learned in Harry that she had found her ultimate partner. This was not just a romance, it was a merger. It was the perfect synthesis. His gravitas, her buzz, his substance, her style, his credibility, her nerve. Together they were a media nuclear weapon. They married in 1981 after his divorce. But Tina Brown was never, ever going to be just the wife. She had her own empire to build. And in 1970s London, the training ground for this new, hybrid, smart gossip was a fusty, failing, 270-year-old society magazine. Its name was Tatler. This was her laboratory. This was where she invented the formula. In 1979, a British real estate developer named Victor Loans bought a dusty, irrelevant, 270-year-old magazine called Tatler. It was a joke. It was the house organ of debutantes, fox-hunting aristocrats, and dowager duchesses. It was a magazine that was, for all intents and purposes, dead. He offered the editorship to the 25-year-old Tina Brown. This was not a job. It was a suicide mission. The magazine had a circulation of barely 10,000. It had no staff, no budget, and absolutely no relevance. Anna Wintour, in a similar position, would have demanded a 5-year plan, a massive budget, and total control. Tina Brown said yes immediately. She understood what no one else did. A dead brand is not a liability. It is a blank canvas. She moved into a tiny, squalid office and, with a handful of other young, ambitious, and equally irreverent writers, she invented the modern high-low magazine. She kept the Tatler name. That was the high. That was the aristocratic, fusty establishment credibility. And then she set the contents on fire. That was the low. She didn't fill it with the old aristocracy. She filled it with the new one, the rock stars, the punk designers, the art world rebels. And yes, the actual young new aristocrats, but she wrote about them in a way no one ever had before. She didn't just profile them, she satirized them. She treated these high society figures with the irreverent, skeptical, and deeply witty eye of a punch journalist. She ran headlines that were, in themselves, a declaration of war on the old guard, the 10 worst things about your best friends, the trouble with Harry's. She invented the babe of the month. She was, in essence, running Capote's playbook, but with one crucial world-changing difference. Capote wrote as the ultimate adoring insider. He loved his Swans, which is why his betrayal was so tragic. Tina wrote as the skeptical, hilarious outsider. She wasn't their friend. She was their anthropologist. She was the smart Oxford girl who had joined their party, and while she was there, was taking meticulous, brilliant, and slightly cruel notes. And then she landed the scoop that would prove her nose for the fuzz was sharper than anyone's in the world. She became obsessed with a new, shy, slightly awkward Sloane Ranger who was just starting to be photographed. a young kindergarten teacher's assistant named Lady Diana Spencer. This was 1980. This was before the engagement. This was before the world knew her name. But Tina saw it. She saw the fuzz. She saw the story. She saw the girl who was both an insider and an outsider. She put her on the cover of Tatler, and in doing so, essentially introduced her to the world. She was not just reporting the news, she was creating it. The result? Tatler was a sensation. In 2 years, the circulation didn't just climb, it exploded. It became the Bible of 1980s London. You did not just read Tatler, you were Tatler. It was the guide to the new post-punk Thatcherite world. She had from nothing created the fuzz. She was 28 years old. She had conquered London. And in New York, another older and infinitely richer media god had noticed. So Newhouse, the quiet, brilliant, and fabulously wealthy owner of Condé Nast, was watching. And C had a problem. A very, very expensive problem. His $100 million bomb, Vanity Fair, was on the verge of total humiliating collapse. He didn't need a scalpel. He needed a blitzkrieg, and he found it in Tina Brown. So Newhouse did not just have a problem. He had a $100 million humiliation. In 1981, he had poured a fortune into resurrecting the legendary Jazz Age magazine, Vanity Fair. He staffed it with the most serious, high-minded editors to create a great cultural journal. By 1983, it was the single most spectacular and expensive bomb in publishing history. It was unreadable. It was fusty, gray, and self-important. It was a glossy tomb, burning millions a month, and the entire city was laughing at C. Newhouse. He had just hired Anna Wintour, a silent bomb, at Vogue. Now he needed the opposite. He didn't need a scalpel. He needed a blitzkrieg. He needed Tina Brown. Newhouse summoned Tina and her new husband, Harry Evans, from London. It was a masterstroke package deal. Harry, a god of British journalism, had just lost a public war with Rupert Murdoch. They both needed an escape. New York was the only stage big enough. Newhouse gave Harry a prestigious job, and he gave Tina, at age 30, the keys to the $100 million bomb. The New York literary establishment was appalled. This child? This British gossip columnist? The staff Tina inherited was, as she described, like a morgue. Tina didn't make a 5-year plan. She did what she'd done at Tatler, kept the high name, and set the contents on fire. The old guard had been running tasteful, forgettable covers. Tina walked in and asked, "What is the loudest, most glamorous, dangerous story in America right now?" The answer was Klaus von Bülow. He was a Capote-esque character, an aristocrat on trial for the attempted murder of his comatose wealthy wife. The old guard might have run a legal analysis. Tina Brown put him on the cover, but she didn't just put him on the cover. She had the provocative photographer Helmut Newton shoot von Bülow in menacing black leather posing with his mistress. It was a nuclear explosion on America's coffee tables. The establishment was apoplectic. This wasn't culture, it was genius. The magazine sold out instantly. Tina had found the buzz. This was her signature high-low formula. She didn't fire the serious writers because she didn't want a trashy magazine. She wanted a dangerous one. She engineered a brilliant fusion. In the very same issue, a reader would find a serious 15,000-word piece on the war in El Salvador, and just a few pages away, they would plunge into a 12,000-word, incredibly juicy and drippingly salacious investigation into a high society murder. It was a psychological masterstroke. She gave the elite permission to read the gossip they secretly craved. You bought the magazine publicly for the high, but you devoured it privately for the low. But to get that scandal, she needed a weapon. Capote was a ghost. She was an outsider. So she found her own Capote. His name was Dominic Dunn. Dunn was a failed Hollywood producer, an outcast. Then the ultimate tragedy struck. His daughter, Dominique, was murdered by her ex-boyfriend. Dunn went to the trial and watched, horrified, as the killer received a pathetically light sentence. He wrote an article about the injustice and sent it to Vanity Fair. The old editors had rejected it. Tina found it in the slush pile. She read it and she saw. This was everything. It was high society, celebrity, murder, and injustice, written by a victim, an insider. She published it immediately. It was a sensation. She hadn't just found a writer. She had found her righteous weapon. She sent her Capote 2.0 back into the world that had cast him out. He went to the Von Bülow trial. He went to the Menendez brothers trial. He didn't just report the facts, he reported the whispers. He was doing exactly what Capote had done, but he was doing it for justice. She had her words. Now she needed the image. She gave Annie Leibovitz an unlimited budget and a new mandate. Don't just photograph them, mythologize them. This wasn't Vogue shooting fashion. This was Vanity Fair shooting power. They captured the Reagans kissing, a perfect, unsettling image of the Hollywood meets Washington era. And then, in August 1991, the final bomb. The cover, a 7 months pregnant and completely starkly naked Demi Moore. That shockwave was global. Newsstands hit it. Religious groups called for a boycott. Critics called it the death of decency. And of course, it became the single best-selling, most talked about, and most profitable issue in the magazine's history. Tina had proven her thesis. Buzz, pure, unadulterated, controversial buzz, was the most valuable commodity in the world. She had done what Capote couldn't. He was an insider, destroyed by his need to be loved. Tina was the ultimate outsider. She wasn't their friend. She was their editor. She understood the new 1980s rule that defines our world. Scandal is not a threat. It is a career move. Capote's Swans were destroyed by exposure. Tina's new Swans leaked their secrets to her to become superstars. She was the undisputed queen of New York. She had won. And so, in 1992, at the absolute dizzying peak of her power, she did the most insane, audacious thing imaginable. She quit. She left to edit the one magazine that was, in every conceivable way, its exact opposite. The most sacred, most fusty, and most resolutely unglamorous magazine in the world. She went to edit The New Yorker. When Tina Brown walked into the offices of The New Yorker in 1992, it was not just a change of editor. It was to the 70-year-old staff an invasion of the Visigoths. To understand the sheer seismic shock, you must understand what The New Yorker was. It was not a magazine. It was a religion. It was the last sacred, untouchable bastion of serious American writing. For over half a century, under its founding editor Harold Ross and his legendary successor William Shawn, it had cultivated an aura of near monastic quiet. Its editors were priests. Its writers, Updike, Salinger, Cheever, were saints. Its famously discreet text-only Talk of the Town section was scripture. It was a place that operated outside of time and, more pointedly, outside of commerce. It was famous for its lifelong contracts for writers, its glacial editing process, and its complete, almost aristocratic disdain for the buzz of the outside world. It was, as Tina would discover, an intellectual socialist commune that was, by 1992, almost completely and proudly irrelevant. And like Tatler and Vanity Fair before it, it was financially dying. Under Shawn's less successful successor, Robert Gottlieb, the magazine was hemorrhaging over $10 million a year. So Newhouse, the man who had patiently funded this intellectual vanity project for decades, was finally out of patience, and his solution was to throw a bomb into the monastery. The staff, this cloistered world of literary monks, looked up from their desks to see the vulgarian at the gates. Tina Brown was to them the Antichrist. She was the devil in Prada a decade before the term existed. She was the gossip queen, the celebrity fucker, the woman who had put a naked, pregnant Demi Moore on a magazine cover. She was the human embodiment of the fuzz, and they saw her as a cultural arsonist, sent to burn their sacred temple to the ground. The backlash was immediate, and it was vicious. A group of the magazine's most famous and long-serving writers, led by George W.S. Trow, quit in a public, furious blaze of glory. Trow wrote a scathing 60-page resignation letter, which was leaked to the press, accusing her of kissing the ass of celebrity and turning the magazine into a vaudeville act. Spy Magazine, the satirical Bible of the 80s, gleefully nicknamed her the Vulgarian. The press, for the first time in her career, was not on her side. They were almost universally against her. They smelled blood. They called the takeover the death of literature. They weren't just predicting her failure, they were praying for it. This was the great controversy of her life. Did Tina Brown save The New Yorker, or did she kill it? The answer, like Tina herself, is a complex both. So why did she do it? Why at 38 would she leave her perfect, glittering Vanity Fair kingdom, where she was adored and all-powerful, to walk into a building where she was universally despised? This is the key to her psychology. This is the insecurity that fueled the fuzz. She had conquered the frivolous world, but the serious world, the world of her Oxford degree, the world of her husband Harry, the world of her father's ghost, still eluded her. The serious critics still looked down on her as a gossip monger. Vanity Fair, for all its success, was still seen as fluff. The New Yorker was the last unconquered mountain. It was in her mind the ultimate test. It was her chance to prove once and for all that the show-off girl from the media canteen was a serious intellectual. It was, as she would later admit, an act of pure, unadulterated hubris. And it was perhaps the loneliest, most miserable, and most brilliant 6 years of her life. The Tina Brown who arrived at the New Yorker was not the swashbuckling pirate of Vanity Fair. She was a general under siege, and the enemy was inside the building. She was also, for the first time, a mother of 2 young children, George and Izzy. And her diaries from this time, which she later published, are a raw, astonishing, and deeply human look at the woman behind the Tinavating. This is where you find the real Tina. Not the queen, but the writer. The public Tina was a genius. The private Tina in her diaries is a wreck of insecurity. She is constantly, obsessively worried. She worries that the old guard staff hate my guts. She worries that a party she's throwing will be a flop. She worries that her first issue is dull, dull, dull. And most of all, she worries that she is a bad mother. There is a famous or infamous Vogue profile of her from 1992, meant to celebrate her new powerful position. The journalist, a young Anna Wintour, visited her at home. The resulting article was a disaster. It painted Tina as a chaotic, frantic, career-obsessed woman, showing a photograph of her on the phone, working while her young son George literally tugged at her, trying to get her attention. The backlash was immediate. The press, already against her, now branded her a terrible mother. This was the unbearable juggling act. She was not a cold, remote machine like Wintour, who could build a wall between her office and her home. Tina was a hot mess. Her life was chaotic, and she, in her journalistic honesty, showed it. She was drowning in guilt, fueled by anxiety, and running on a 24/7 adrenaline drip of her own making. This vulnerability, this Capote part of her, was her secret weapon. It was the insecurity that drove her. It was the fear of being boring, the cardinal sin from her childhood that made her relentless. Anna Wintour's power came from a deep, cold certainty. Tina Brown's power came from a hot, frantic anxiety. She had to have the best story. She had to have the biggest scandal. She had to create the fuzz because she was terrified of what would happen if the noise ever stopped. So under siege and fueled by this frantic energy, she did what she always did. She went on the attack. She didn't just re-edit The New Yorker. She Tinavated it. First, she tore up the visual DNA of the magazine. This was her most immediate and most shocking sacrilege. The New Yorker cover was a sacred illustration-only space. It was famous for its gentle, whimsical narrative cartoons. Tina, the woman who had built her career on the high-impact photography of Helmut Newton and Annie Leibovitz, decided this had to change. In 1993, she published the first-ever photographic cover in the magazine's history, a stark black-and-white portrait by Richard Avedon. The old guard was apoplectic. Then she hired Avedon as the magazine's first-ever staff photographer and introduced color photographs inside the magazine, a heresy. She shortened the articles. She sped up the famously glacial editing process. She tore up the anonymous, discreet Talk of the Town section, adding bylines and a buzzy new logo. And then she applied the Vanity Fair high-low formula. She brought in her sharks. She hired David Remnick. She hired Christopher Hitchens. She hired Jeffrey Toobin, and she paired them with celebrities. She ran a fawning 10,000-word profile of Arnold Schwarzenegger. She put Roseanne Barr on the cover. The old guard was having a collective aneurysm. A sitcom star on the cover of The New Yorker? This was, to them, the end of civilization. But the Tinavation was not just about celebrities. It was about relevance. She was dragging this brilliant, intellectual, but hopelessly ivory tower institution and forcing it to engage with the real, messy, chaotic, and often vulgar world. She proved this decisively with two moments. First, the Kissing Jews cover. In 1993, for Valentine's Day, in the wake of the Crown Heights riots, a period of intense racial and religious tension in New York, Tina published a cover by cartoonist Art Spiegelman. It was not a whimsical drawing of Cupid. It depicted a Hasidic Jewish man in full religious garb in a passionate romantic kiss with a black woman. The city exploded. It was shocking. It was dangerous. It was brilliant. It was not the gentle, detached New Yorker of the past. It was journalism. It was buzz. Her second and most defining moment was her decision to cover the O.J. Simpson trial. This was the ultimate test of her high-low theory. The O.J. trial, which began in 1994, was the trashiest, most sensational, most tabloid story of the decade. The New Yorker, under any previous editor, would have considered it profoundly beneath them. They would have, at most, run a dry intellectual piece about the legal theory of the trial. 6 months after it ended, Tina Brown didn't just cover it, she owned it. She understood that this was not just a murder trial. It was a cultural atom bomb. It was a story about race, class, domestic violence, celebrity, and the media. It was, in short, a Vanity Fair story that had escaped into the real world. She put O.J. Simpson's lawyer, Johnny Cochran, on the cover, drawn as a dandy, and she assigned her new star, Jeffrey Toobin, to live the trial. Toobin's reporting from that courtroom was not the old detached New Yorker style. It was fast, it was sharp, it was gossipy, it was buzzy, and it was brilliant. The critics screamed dumbing down. Tina's defense? She wasn't dumbing down, she was opening up. She argued, saving the magazine from itself. She was forcing the intellectual elite to reckon with the one great, messy, lowbrow story that was defining their entire culture. And the numbers? The numbers proved her right. The argument against Tina is that she killed the soul of The New Yorker, that she traded its quiet, timeless, intellectual integrity for a noisy, ephemeral, celebrity-obsessed buzz. The argument for Tina is that she was a doctor performing a brutal but necessary surgery. When she took over, the magazine was dying, bleeding $10 million a year. In her 6 years at The New Yorker, she doubled newsstand sales. She increased overall circulation by 25%. And the dumbing down? In that same period, The New Yorker won more national magazine awards than at any other time in its history. She wasn't just publishing profiles of Roseanne Barr. She was publishing the journalism that would become the best-selling, award-winning books, The Hot Zone and The Perfect Storm. She was publishing the first groundbreaking reports on the tobacco industry. She had once again proven her thesis. She had proven that high and low could live together. She had proven that serious did not have to mean boring. She had won. She had saved the unsavable. She had conquered the serious world. But the victory felt hollow. The serious literary world never forgave her. They never truly accepted her. She was to them still the brash punk gossip queen from Vanity Fair, no matter how many awards she won. And Tina, the girl from Oxford, the one who was still deep down desperate to be respected, felt the sting. She had given them success, and they still held her in contempt. She was exhausted. She had been at war inside her own building for 6 straight years. The anxiety, the juggling act, the constant 24/7 need to feed the fuzz machine had burned her out. And then, in 1997, the fuzz turned dark. The ultimate high-low story, the one Tina had, in a way, been building her entire career on, the intersection of royalty and celebrity, exploded. Princess Diana, her friend, the babe of the month from her old Tatler days, was killed in a car crash in a Paris tunnel, chased by the very paparazzi that Tina's buzz economy had helped create. The world was horrified, and in a way, the party was over. The high-stakes, high-glamour, high-scandal world of the 80s and 90s suddenly felt sick. The fuzz had become toxic. Tina, by her own account, was shattered. This was the dark side of the celebrity machine she had helped to build. The game was no longer fun. She had, in a way, lost her compass. She was 44 years old. She had conquered London, mastered Vanity Fair, and even tamed The New Yorker. She had proven her father's ghost wrong. She had nothing left to prove. And in 1998, she made the second, and this time, fatal gamble of her career. She quit The New Yorker. She quit Condé Nast. She left the safe, infinitely wealthy, protective cocoon of C. Newhouse. Why? Because she was offered the one thing she had never had, the one final, irresistible, hubristic temptation. She was offered her own name on the door, and the man who offered it to her was the new ultimate symbol of 1990s power. A brutish, brilliant, terrifyingly powerful, and buzzy film producer named Harvey Weinstein. He and his company Miramax offered Tina millions to start a new magazine from scratch, a magazine that would be the final perfect synthesis of her entire career. It would mix film, fashion, politics, and celebrity. It would be, in short, her. They called it Talk. The launch of Talk magazine in 1999 was not just a launch, it was a coronation. It was the single deafening, hubristic climax of the entire 1990s. It was on paper a brilliant idea, but it was in reality a Shakespearean tragedy in the making. It was the story of Tina's greatest strength, her addiction to the fuzz becoming her fatal flaw. The entire enterprise was built on a foundation of hubris, and it was undone by a toxic combination: the wrong partner, the wrong timing, and the wrong world. First, the partner. Her new partner, Harvey Weinstein, was not Cy Newhouse. See, Newhouse was old money. He was patient. He was a publisher. He understood that building a legacy magazine like Vogue or The New Yorker was a long, slow 10-year game. He was willing to lose millions of dollars a year for decades to build a brand. Harvey Weinstein was new money. He was impatient. He was a movie producer. He did not understand long-term brand building. He understood blockbusters. He expected his $50 million investment in talk to perform like his $50 million investment in Pulp Fiction. He expected a massive, immediate, profitable hit. From day one, the partnership was a culture clash, a war between the patient, aristocratic world of print and the fast, brutal, cash-driven world of Hollywood. Second, the hubris. Before a single issue had even been printed, Tina and Harvey decided to launch the magazine with a party. But this was not a party. It was the party. On August 2nd, 1999, they held the launch party for Talk magazine at the Statue of Liberty. They ferried 800 of the most powerful people on earth, Hollywood stars, political figures, media titans, to Liberty Island on private boats. They had fireworks. They had a performance by Sting. The entire event cost millions. It was, in short, the most extravagant, most expensive, and most Tina Brown event in human history. It was the physical manifestation of the fuzz. It was a declaration we are the new center of the universe. But it was also a fatal error. The party was so loud, so arrogant, and so over the top that it created an impossible crushing weight of expectation. The magazine itself could never live up to the hype of its own launch. The press, who had once been her allies, now smelled blood. They were, frankly, jealous, and they were waiting with knives sharpened for her to fail. Finally, the timing. The magazine itself, when it launched, was good. It was, in fact, brilliant. It was the perfect synthesis of her career, Vanity Fair's buzz, mixed with The New Yorker's intellect. The first issue featured a 10,000-word interview with Hillary Clinton. It had a portfolio by Annie Leibovitz. It was exactly what she had promised. But it was the wrong magazine for the wrong world at the exact wrong time. The party at the Statue of Liberty had been the peak. The world was about to collapse. In 2000, just a few months later, the dot-com bubble burst. The tech-fueled irrational exuberance economy that had funded the 90s evaporated overnight. And the first thing to go? Advertising budgets, especially for a brand new, unproven, and wildly expensive magazine. Talk began to bleed money. And Harvey Weinstein, unlike C. Newhouse, was not a patient banker. He was a movie producer with a flop. He panicked. And then, just as Tina was fighting for her magazine's life, the world changed forever. On September 11th, 2001, the towers fell. The fuzz, the buzz, the entire glittering, celebrity-obsessed, high-low world that Tina Brown had built and mastered it all seemed in an instant grotesque, obscene, irrelevant. Who cared about a movie premiere when the world was on fire? Who cared about a society scandal when 3,000 people were dead? The party was over, for real this time. The advertising market didn't just soften, it vanished. And Talk magazine, with its massive movie producer-sized overhead, its expensive writers, its glossy paper, went with it. It folded in a spectacular, public, and humiliating blaze of failure in January 2002. It was the most high-profile magazine failure of the decade. The Queen, it seemed, was dead. Her partnership with a man who would later be revealed as a monster, and her failure in the face of a global tragedy, seemed to be the final, dark, ironic chapter. This was the great controversy and the great argument of her career. The vulgarian from Spy magazine, the gossip queen who had Tinavated The New Yorker, had finally, in her own hubris, flown too close to the sun. Her critics felt vindicated. This, they said, is what happens when you build an empire on fluff. When reality hits, the fuzz burns away. Tina Brown, for the first time in her 30-year career, was not just out of a job. She was irrelevant. She was a ghost from a bygone era. But this is where her true legacy begins. Because Tina Brown did not die. She just morphed. She did what she had always done. She pivoted. She spent the next few years in the wilderness. She hosted a short-lived talk show on CNBC. She wrote a fawning, best-selling biography of Princess Diana, a book that was in itself a kind of eulogy for the fuzz of the 90s. She was, it seemed, semi-retired. An icon, yes, but a relic. And then, in 2008, she did it again. She looked at the new, post-9/11, post-print, and now post-financial crash world, and she saw the future. And the future, she realized, was not in glossy paper. It was on the internet. At a time when the New York Times and Condé Nast were still treating the web as a toy, as a blog, as something frivolous, Tina Brown saw it for what it was. The new Vanity Fair. In 2008, with media executive Barry Diller, she co-founded the Daily Beast. It was in essence Vanity Fair, reincarnated for the digital age. It was Tatler on speed. It was fast, it was smart, it was cheap, and it was pure, 100 proof, uncut, high-low. The high, she hired the serious, gray newspaper journalists who had just been laid off and had them write 10,000-word, deeply reported investigative pieces on politics and war. The low, she put right next to those pieces a screaming, sensational, shameless clickbait headline about a celebrity scandal, a royal baby, or a hot new trend. The old guard, once again, was horrified. They called it intellectual junk food. But it worked. It was the Tatler formula all over again. The high gave the low credibility, and the low paid the bills. The Daily Beast became one of the fastest growing, most talked about, and most important news sites on the planet. And this is her ultimate and most lasting implication. We are, all of us, living in Tina Brown's world. Anna Wintour may rule fashion, but Tina Brown invented the language of modern media. The high-low mix that she was crucified for at The New Yorker, it is now the only model. Magazines like New York Magazine, websites like BuzzFeed and Politico, even serious newspapers like The Guardian or The New York Times, they are all, in their own way, Vanity Fair children. They all understand that to survive, you must mix your serious long-form journalism with listicles, with gossip, with celebrity clickbait. The celebrity a serious subject? That was her. The idea that a profile of Arnold Schwarzenegger could be as serious as a profile of a politician? That was her. The buzz economy? The 24/7 news cycle? The idea that the launch party is as important as the product? The idea that a politician, a writer, and a movie star are all, in the end, just different brands of celebrity? That is all Tina. She didn't just resurrect Capote's New York, she bottled it. She turned the fuzz from a private aristocratic vice into a global, democratic, and infinitely profitable product. The tragedy of her career, if there is one, is the tragedy of her success. She created a monster, a media landscape so obsessed with buzz, so addicted to the fuzz, that it can no longer distinguish between celebrity and substance. She created the world that gave us The Apprentice. She created the world where a real estate mogul she had put on the cover of Vanity Fair could use that fuzz to become a president. She took Capote's dangerous world of secrets, and she made it so profitable and so public that it eventually swallowed journalism, politics, and reality itself. Which brings us back, finally, to the two writers, Truman Capote, the tragic ghost, and Tina Brown, the ultimate survivor. Capote's New York was a closed system, a private club. He was the ultimate insider. He loved his Swans. He was emotionally entangled, and in one fatal suicidal act of writing, he made himself an outsider forever. He told the one secret he wasn't supposed to tell, and it destroyed him. His tragedy was that he cared too much about being accepted. Tina Brown's New York was a television studio. It was a stage. She was, and always has been, the ultimate outsider, the British spy, the Oxford anthropologist. She understood the one great cynical truth of the modern age. There are no secrets. Or rather, she understood that secrets are no longer currency to be hoarded. They are a commodity to be traded. Capote's Swans were destroyed by shame. Tina's generation, the Trumps, the Weinsteins, the celebrities, were built by publicity. In the end, Anna Wintour, the woman who judges the world, is the ultimate queen. But Tina Brown, the woman who wrote the world, is the ultimate author. She is the woman who looked at the wreckage of an old aristocratic world with its whispers and its shame, and decided to build a new, louder, and more shameless one in its place. She took the fluff her father's generation had dismissed, and she weaponized it. She took the gossip her intellectual peers despised, and she turned it into a multi-billion-dollar empire. She is that girl from Oxford, still deep down, terrified of being boring. And in her lifelong frantic and brilliant quest to never, ever be dull, she created the fuzz that we all now call reality. She didn't just resurrect Capote's world. She sold it the one thing it had always desperately been dying for, a global audience.